coalition of the willing or a party of war? Close to 30 countries have committed to security guarantees for Ukraine, but Russia argues their intervention is prolonging the conflict. Meanwhile, another US deadline for talks has come and gone. Has President Trump's diplomatic offensive failed? It's up for debate on Counterpoints with me, Melinda Nusofora. Europe and its Western allies are putting on a united front. Meeting in Paris, leaders from the coalition of the willing say they're now the coalition of the ready, having agreed to security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. But is Europe's readiness helping or hindering progress towards a peace deal?
The European War Party will not calm down. This is in stark contrast to the approach President Putin adheres to, and US President Trump as well, whose efforts to bring the process to a peaceful course are difficult to overestimate, and we are grateful for them. The Europeans are hindering these efforts.
The Russian president put on a defiant display as he returned to the world stage this week, telling Ukraine's Zelenskyy if he wants to talk, he should come to Moscow. That doesn't sound like a man who's particularly worried about comments like this from the US.
I have no message to President Putin. He knows where I stand, and he'll make a decision one way or the other. Whatever his decision is, we'll either be happy about it or unhappy. And if we're unhappy about it, you'll see things happen.
But as yet, President Trump's threats have been all carrot and no stick. On this episode of Counterpoints, we'll ask, is Europe responsible for prolonging the war? Is Russia's Vladimir Putin playing for time with no intention of making a deal? And has President Trump's charm offensive failed? Joining us to discuss the Ukraine war deadlock is Lesia Vasyl-Enok, a Ukrainian MP for the Holos party. Tobias Ellwood is joining us, a former British Conservative MP and former chair of the UK Parliament's Defence Select Committee. And rounding out our panel, Hinkle, a political commentator and host of the Legitimate Targets podcast. Welcome to Counterpoints, everyone. Thank you so much for your time. We've heard a lot of tough talk out of Paris on Thursday as the so-called coalition of the willing met to knuckle out plans for security guarantees for Ukraine in the event of a ceasefire. But Russia views those talks by their very nature as provocative and creating more hurdles to peace. Lesia, is European intervention prolonging the war?
Definitely not. Europe standing together, it's finally the correct long-term strategic guarantee of peace that Ukraine and actually all European nations were looking for such a long time. And it's a good sign that there is a readiness for peacekeeping missions to be not just theoretical, but to be in the form of boots on the ground in Ukraine, with all 26 European nations behind this idea and ready to contribute their men and women who will presumably be on the ground, standing with the Ukrainian soldiers side by side, ensuring that the peace is really guaranteed and that there is no chance of Russia breaching that peace. When it comes to Russia and its claims about the fact that one nation's security cannot create burdens or risks or challenges to Russia's peace and security, it's a very strange concept, because when Russia launches long-range missiles and drones from North Korea, from Iran to Ukraine on a nightly basis, this is suddenly not considered as a security threat to Ukraine.
Jackson, what's your take on that, especially this idea that there could be boots on the ground, that the US is going to be involved in these security guarantees? Is all this intervention just prolonging the war?
Well, I think that what the other panelists just said was absolutely insane. I mean, this panelist is a member of parliament in Ukraine, and you'd think that they would care about Ukrainian lives. 15,000 civilians in Ukraine died in the Donbass before the special military operation was launched. But this member of parliament never addressed that once on her Twitter. She never posted once about it. Now she's posting all these lies saying that Russia's slaughtering civilians left and right. Meanwhile, she's taking fake images from book covers from 2013 and trying to pass it off as Ukrainian children. The truth is, the only path to peace here is a complete, total, and utter end to the war. No temporary ceasefire is going to work. And honestly, as for peacekeepers, I think it would be interesting. Donald Trump proposed the idea and backed the idea of having Chinese peacekeepers. I think that could be an interesting proposal. But having an entire NATO coalition of troops enter Ukraine when President Putin's one aim for this, one of two aims, was the demilitarization and denazification of Ukraine to make sure Ukraine would never be in NATO. I mean, it's absurd, it's laughable, and it's never going to happen.
I'm going to bring you in just a moment, Tobias, but Lesia, I'll give you a chance to respond to those comments.
Yeah, thank you. Well, first of all, it was never about any special operations. It was Russia's aggression against Ukraine from day one. And day one being February 2014, when Russia launched its military operation, aggressive military operation, to annex Crimea and occupy the Ukrainian territories of Donetsk and Lugansk, the so-called Donbass regions. The people of Ukraine who are still living in those regions are Ukrainians who want to speak Ukrainian language, who want to learn Ukrainian history, and who want to live by the Ukrainian culture and tradition, not an imposed Russian culture and tradition, which is being done by Russia in its aspirations to recreate the Russian Empire. And all that Ukrainian people want is to be left alone and have the right to live in an independent Ukraine. And basically, this is what it's about. There's one victim here, Ukraine, that is defending itself, and there's one aggressor here, Russia, that is attacking the very principles of democracy and the right of sovereign nations to self-define and to have the right to territorial integrity. That's as simple as that.
Tobias, if Europe is serious about peace, why aren't they engaging with Russia directly and more consistently to work on a peace deal rather than holding meetings about forming new military groups to provide boots on the ground in Ukraine against Russia?
Well, good evening. Let me first say I hope we can keep this conversation professional and focus on the issues at hand rather than taking personal swipes. I'm not sure that achieves anything. You asked the important question as to whether or not a deal could be struck with Russia. And that's what concerns capital cities across Europe as to what Russia might do if a deal was struck, whether or not we'd simply have a pause and we'd see a regrouping, a rearming, and Russia doing something else further in Europe. And that is the dilemma of appeasing the bully. And it's better if Europe and America are in lockstep, always, when it comes to these things. Unfortunately, Donald Trump has wanted to do exactly what I've just described, which is to bring Russia in from the cold, to trust Moscow, to strike a deal with Putin. And so European capitals went along with that, with the Alaska summit and the discussions afterwards. What happened after is the continued bombing, devastating attacks on the capital city in Ukraine, underlining what Russia's intentions are. But wider than that, if I can just share a bigger analysis, which shows just how Ukraine is one cog of a bigger geopolitical jigsaw. Where have we seen Putin this week? Rubbing shoulders with China. And President Xi openly promoting a non-Western vision as to where our global order should go. That places into context what Russia is doing and why there is now a coalition of the willing developing, despite what America is thinking, because we know that if we don't stand up and support a democracy in Eastern Europe where this might unfold, and the challenge that we have in Europe now is persuading America, persuading Donald Trump that it should be vested in the very global order that it helped craft in the first place after the Second World War. The longer the Western order crumbles, the stronger the Chinese model starts to advance. And as I stress, Russia is in lockstep now with China. That is the bigger picture that we must now face.
Jackson, what do you think? Has Russia, in effect, brought this on itself? The fact that President Putin hasn't followed through with these peace talk suggestions, that there's only discussion of a multinational troop because Russia's not giving Europe any other option?
Well, I think President Putin should only engage in serious peace talks. And what the NATO counterparts are offering is nothing serious. I mean, even the panelists right beside me, they believe that Russia should be kicked out of the United Nations. Of course, they think that Israel should be allowed to be in the United Nations. They've slaughtered 300,000 civilians in Gaza.
Sorry to cut across you.
But the truth is, wait, I didn't interrupt you.
Who said
something about me? I didn't interrupt.
Yeah,
you.
Jackson, if you could just make reference to that. Which of your panelists are you accusing of asking Russia to be kicked out of the UN?
The member of parliament has said that.
Making it up. No.
Ask the member of parliament if you believe Russia should be kicked out of the UN.
Lesia?
Is that a question to me, whether I believe that Russia should be kicked out of the UN? Well, Russia has no standing to be in the UN. If you look at the legalistic issue of it, Russia has never presented its credentials to be in the UN in the first place. But it's an entirely different discussion, and one which cannot be just lightly brushed over in this conversation. It merits its own hour of debate and discussion with legal professionals who are experts in the UN, rather than just talking over political issues.
Okay, indeed. All right, we will leave that discussion for another day. Jackson, if you could respond to the question.
Yeah, I don't know if that's true because you put out an 8-word tweet saying Russia should be kicked out of the United Nations, but I'll leave that to the side for now. The truth is that we're not living in more professional. We're not living in a world with serious conversations being had whatsoever in any way, shape, or form. Again, this member of parliament, she said that Putin should be brought to Ukraine or to the United States, and he should be held accountable for his crimes. That's one of her demands for ending this conflict. It's insane. I mean, Putin is not the one.
Why is it insane? He's an international criminal. There's an ICC arrest warrant issued against.
And you're the one whose father was an ambassador to the United Kingdom. You got a cushy job in Parliament, and you sent a million Ukrainian
Raise the bar, sir.
Okay, we'll avoid the personal discussions and go back to the topic.
This is pathetic.
What's pathetic is that she sent 1 million men to their death in a suicide mission.
No, you're
rounding men off the streets in Ukraine right now. They act like they care about Ukrainian lives, but they're killing them each and every day instead of settling a peace deal.
Okay, we're going to move on to focusing on Russia specifically here, because I don't necessarily think that Lesia is responsible for sending all those troops to their death, as you say, Jackson. But let's return our focus to the topic at hand. We've focused on what Europe wants, but one of the other big questions is, what does Russia want? Russia's President Vladimir Putin has so far found every reason not to meet with President Zelenskyy to negotiate a peace deal. When President Trump took office, he stunned many European and Ukrainian officials when he suggested Ukraine would have to make territorial concessions. But will that be enough to end the war? Lesia, what do you make of this? Do you think Russia is serious about wanting peace? And if Ukraine does make these concessions, do you think that will be enough to get Russia back to the table?
Appeasing the aggressor has never worked, and history has many examples of this. It just simply does not work. It just raises the bar, it raises the appetites of any aggressor to go out and do more. And we were on the topic of China here. In fact, it's not just Western countries that are watching what's happening in Ukraine, but it's actually Southeast Asian countries who are very, very careful observers about what will the consequences be for Russia and for Vladimir Putin in particular. And if there are no consequences, there is great, great risk that other countries, China, for example, will also grow in their appetites for territorial claims in the respective regions. And this will set the world off into a whole domino effect of wars and conflicts in various parts of the world, and we will definitely not be enjoying a lasting peace which allows all of our nations to develop in the way that we would expect the development to be happening in the 21st century. So what happens in Ukraine, and most importantly, what are the consequences for Russia and the Russian political establishment, starting with Vladimir Putin and all the other cronies who surround him and are responsible for the war crimes that are being committed time and time again on a daily, on an hourly basis in Ukraine, on the territory of Ukraine, against the Ukrainian people since 2014. It's a very important issue and a very important question, which will lay the foundations for either a long-lasting peace in the world or a long-lasting war with various conflicts erupting all across our planet, all around our planet. And that's the position of Ukraine. When we claim that we want a restored territorial integrity, it's not just a whim of the Ukrainian people. It's a country fighting for the international law to be respected by its neighbors and by also all the other countries, and also making sure that the world order as we know it today, where there is sovereignty of states, territorial integrity, respect for human rights, where all these concepts actually mean something on paper. And if we want for these concepts to actually mean something and for people all around the world to be enjoying global peace, prosperity, development, rather than a struggle against wars and dictators, then we as an international community must make sure that there is no concessions to dictators such as Vladimir Putin, and that the very basic concepts of international law are respected and kept intact. And this is something that must be done not just by one country alone that is defending itself, that's Ukraine at the moment, but by the international community as a whole that should be interested in the maintenance of the world order and of the international law and the rules that have kept us alive and kept us in a way coexisting as peaceful nations.
Okay, Tobias, what do you make of it? The idea or the allegation, perhaps I should say, that President Putin is just biding time to achieve more favourable conditions on the ground, to give him a better hand at the negotiating table. Do you think that's a legitimate concern, or is it that Ukraine is just not putting a good enough deal on the table to be negotiated?
Well, what is the deal that's being discussed? It's handing over a fifth of Ukraine to the aggressor. And this is the biggest concern, is does it end there? Do we then assign a deal and we all go home and hope that peace will then prevail? Now, history suggests, as Lisa's already been saying, that actually it doesn't work out that way. That when you hand conditions to the bully then wants more. And this is a 1938 feel to the world, and particularly Europe now. And it's concerning that America, and indeed our podcaster here, believes that somehow a deal could be struck and then Russia could be trusted. Russia has got North Korean troops working with it attacking Ukraine. It's sitting next to China. There's a bigger geopolitical challenge that we face of our world splintering, which America hasn't woken up to. And that's the bigger picture that we need to face. So this coalition of the willing, a serious effort in Paris that's emerged today to say, actually, we're making a judgment call here. We do not trust Russia to stay firm with a deal. We do need to support with Ukraine. Otherwise, it won't end there. Russia will continue advancing its influence in a sort of Stalinist approach across Eastern Europe. Now, perhaps people are wrong there, but is that a risk that you wish to take? I'm afraid the West and NATO particularly has been too risk averse. We're only now talking about a potential no-fly zone, an air support that should have come in ages ago. Putin has been attacking on a daily basis Ukraine, far away from the actual battlefield itself, but the capital city and other cities as well. That is the war crime that we're speaking about. That's why the ICC has a warrant out for Putin. Now, to stand up to that, you need a suitable force. NATO is the biggest, most formidable, potent military alliance the world has ever seen, and it's sitting on its hands. We need to support Europe, stand with Ukraine, and stand up to Russia.
Jackson, you're in Moscow. Do you think that Russia seriously wants to end the war with Ukraine and the coalition of the willing if they were to provide concrete security guarantees and Ukraine was to make territorial concessions? Do you think that President Putin is serious about it?
Well, yes. I mean, it's the only option. Let's come back to reality, folks. We got people talking about, heaven forbid, we're going to have to give up a fifth of the country to Russia. That's already happened. I mean, it's already Russian. I've been there. It's beautiful. They're using rubles. The people are speaking Russian freely. They feel safe. Their homes are being rebuilt. Their businesses are being rebuilt after what the Ukrainians did. Well, they're terrorizing. And actually, I saw some of it when I was there. They were bombing apartment buildings while I was there. Ukraine was. The truth is that while these Europeans, they try to act like Putin is the new Hitler or something like that, and he's going to storm into, I don't know, France or something next. It's all ludicrous. It's all lies. It's the same lies we heard in Iraq, same lies we heard about COVID, same lies we heard about Gaza. It's the same thing over and over and over. All these globalists, same exact lies over and over. And the last thing I'll say about this is that Zelenskyy himself, he should be the biggest Putin supporter on the face of the earth. He should be praying to God each and every day, thanking President Putin for not dropping an Arabiya on his head 1 year ago, because he could have done that and he hasn't done that. But it just goes to show Putin is not the guy that, these co-hosts on this panel make him out to be.
What do you think, Tobias? Is it the only option that Ukraine needs to relinquish a fifth of its territory because it's already lost it already?
So I didn't realize that Jackson is actually in Moscow. And that, I think, explains a lot of what we're hearing today. I don't know what payroll you're under. But ultimately, to cede 1/5 of the country just because it speaks Russian
I
shows a sense of ignorance as to what Ukraine is.
Say that. Russian, I mean, that's come on.
Well, if you're done, if you've been to Eastern Ukraine, you'll know that actually they've been speaking Russian for an awful long time. That's not a justification for Russia to then invade a country in the way that it's done, and then to claim that it's all okay that 1/5, in the same way that they had no right to invade Georgia in the same way. Are you going to tell me Abkhazia and South Ossetia are now doing really, really well? They're not. And likewise, where does the bully stop? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. And you've not really answered that as to whether there will be longer term intentions as to where Russia will take this, knowing that it's got top cover from China and indeed North Korea as well. That is the bigger question. That's why comparisons are made, I'm afraid, with 1938 again. And we've become too risk averse in standing up to the bully. For you to suggest somehow that, I don't know what language you were using, but somehow some large bomb could be dropped on Zelenskyy. And are we grateful that Putin didn't do this? Are you really advocating that sort of action on the battlefield?
Jackson?
Am I advocating that Zelensky's hit with an Arabiya?
Yes.
Is that a question to me? Well, I'm not the president of Russia, but clearly, President Putin has a cooler head than I do. But you said something a moment ago.
The fact that you hesitate, sir. The fact that you hesitate and you can't answer that as a straight question. That you think it's okay. No,
I'll answer it with a straight question.
Elected leader of another country is crazy.
I'll answer it with a straight question. 100%. The truth about it is that whatever happens to Zelenskyy, he's going to meet his creator one day and he's going to go to hell. If it was up to me, of course, I think I'd probably drop the Arabiya, but I don't know. There's a lot of considerations to be made there. But, you know, I'm not the president of any country. I'm not a politician. I'm not the one on this panel who's sending 1 million men to their death in Ukraine. But a few moments ago, you said something. You said that, what payroll am I on? What payroll are you on? You worked for the British Defense Ministry or something, or you were on the Defense Council? So you're literally a talking parrot of the British Ministry of Defense, and you're going to come out here and attack an independent journalist? I mean, you understand how hypocritical and insane you look?
Okay, I'll give you a chance to respond to that, and then I'm going to bring us back onto the topic at hand. Tobias, you respond, and then I'm going to hand it over to Lesia.
Well, I repeat, we should keep this bar high. You know, I'm attacking what you believe in and what you say. You've just advocated dropping a bomb on a leader of a free state, a democratically elected leader.
He's not the leader.
Now, that speaks volumes about your thinking. Well, again, the fact that you're even challenging whether he's the leader or not, again, speaks volumes about where we are. But it's a distraction.
Why can't he have an election?
Of what we're trying to talk about here, which is where this goes next. And whether or not a deal
why can't Zelenskyy hold an election? Everyone in the U.S., President Trump wants him to hold an election. Abraham Lincoln held an election during the Civil War. Why can't Zelenskyy just hold an election?
Okay, well, let's get Lesia to respond to that. Lesia, what do you make of that?
Sorry, there's an answer to that.
Go ahead, Tobias.
And I'll let Lesia expand. But it's to do with the Ukrainian constitution. So if you read the Ukrainian constitution, you're not allowed to have an election in the midst of a war. Now, if the constitution was changed, then absolutely. But this talk, and I heard it from J.D. Vance as well, hold elections. It's ignorant. It doesn't understand what's going on the ground. Many Ukrainians are actually abroad at the moment. It'll be difficult for them. And you're in a situation of war. That's not when you hold elections. And it's a distraction. A complete distraction from the fact that Russia has invaded Ukraine. What are we going to do about it?
Okay, Lesia, expand on that. To Jackson's point about why there aren't elections to take the question away regarding Zelensky's legitimacy. And then I also want you to respond to this. If Russia does agree to a ceasefire or a peace deal, if Ukraine does make territorial concessions, is there any trust left that you think Russia is a reliable partner at the negotiating table?
Right, there's no trust towards Russia whatsoever. So let's take that question off the table. Russia has breached its trust so many times in the past in our bilateral relations. This happened in 2014. This later happened in 2022. Coming back to the discussion that we are having here, I'm actually very disturbed that we're not talking about the topics at hand, the burning topics that the viewers want to hear about, what's happening on the ground, what will happen to a state that is clearly an aggressor state, what are the consequences of this aggression, and that we are turning time and time again to hear some personal attacks from one of the co-panelists on the other two co-panelists. And actually, I agree here with Tobias. The fact that our third co-panelist is in Moscow right now and is visiting illegally occupied territories of Ukraine speaks volumes for who we are dealing with. And I'm also extremely upset to be hearing the sorts of propaganda about how happy every single Ukrainian is living in Russia-occupied territory, spending rubles and so on. How about the Ukrainian-speaking population in those areas? Where are they? Why don't you speak about the isolation prison? Why don't you speak about the torture centers? Why don't you speak about the points where parents get separated from their children? Why don't you speak about the thousands, the 20,000 of children that have been illegally deported from Ukraine, that have been taken from their parents, that their parents are right now in basically concentration camps and torture prisons, and these kids are being put up forcefully for adoption into Russian families, never to see their Ukrainian families again, never to see their Ukraine again, where these children are made to learn Russian, where these children are forced to be Russified, and as soon as the boys reach 16, they start to be trained in the Russian army to then go back and kill Ukrainians. Why don't you talk about that?
Okay,
that part
Jackson?
of the Ukrainian population.
What about the Ukrainian population in those occupied territories that you visited?
Yes, the population in the territories, by the way, they're not occupied, they're liberated. the territories that I visited.
Semantics,
I mean, they
but
were
either
all
way.
very happy.
It's not semantics.
They were
it's
very
international law. They are occupied by Russia that is waging the war of aggression against Ukraine.
Miss Parliament member, let's talk about international law for a second. Let's talk about your buddies in the Azov Battalion, the Nazi Azov Battalion that you support. You want to uphold international law? I think you should be tried at a Nuremberg-like trial for crimes against humanity and supporting these Nazis who are murdering and slaughtering innocent civilians in the Donbass and have been since 2014. Again, I know you never talked about that before the special military operation began. I looked at your Twitter. I noticed you didn't talk about it. But why don't we uphold that
I didn't have a
international
Twitter
law?
account before 2019.
You condemn the Azov Battalion?
Okay, but before we get into this, Jackson, I just want you to respond to the question at hand, but because if we go off on too many tangents, we're not going to be able to cover all the topics we need to. Respond to the question that Lesia put to you directly about the state of the Ukrainian speaking and the Ukrainian population in that eastern part of the country that you have visited, and then we're going to move on to an American focus.
Well, that part of the country voted overwhelmingly back in 2014 to become somewhat sovereign. They said that they wanted certain levels of sovereignty, and eventually later on in 2014 they voted to become independent. And that's what actually started this whole thing, because their rights were being trampled on. They wanted to speak Russian. Their Russian language was being taken away from them. They recognized that the president was couped illegally. They were 10 votes short of an impeachment in the Verkhovna Rada. I know this second guy here from the UK keeps talking about the Constitution of Ukraine. Well, the Constitution was violated when the president was illegally couped. And the people in eastern Ukraine said, that's enough. We don't want to be a part of this anymore. And then Ukraine slaughtered those people for 8 years because they decided to do that. Same with Crimea. They would have done the same there if they had the opportunity to slaughter them. But of course, they can't do that.
Excuse me, who did Ukraine slaughter? This is the most insane piece of lies.
Do you deny? Wait.
Just plain lies.
Who did Ukraine slaughter?
Do
you deny that there are OSCE?
To millions of viewers.
Wait.
It's just simply not right. It's not journalism.
You asked me a question. You asked me a question.
Presumptions and assumptions, and I'm sorry, but this is impossible to listen.
Okay, you asked me a question.
Because there were never situations where Ukraine forbid anyone to speak Russian. There are millions of people today still in Ukraine who speak Russian freely in the streets, in their home lives, wherever. There was never issues about prosecutions for the Russian language, unlike prosecutions for the Ukrainian language in occupied territories that Russia holds control over at the moment. There were never issues of anyone in Ukraine being slaughtered by the Ukrainian government. I'm sorry, this is completely untrue and completely out of the blue. And you have zero facts to prove it and to stand for your words.
Were there not OSCE observers in the Donbass were there not OSCE observers there monitoring everything and monitoring the ceasefire violations and which civilians were being killed on which side? Did that not happen, or am I forgetting that?
I think you are really seriously twisting a lot of information and words into one point. No, it did not happen that Ukrainian soldiers were killing Ukrainian civilians. It did not.
Okay, all right, Tobias, do you want to make a comment? Let's hear from you, and then we're going to have to move on.
I do. I mean, with respect, I think this is almost farcical interviews that I've ever participated in. Now, I've spoken about Ukraine many times. I've visited the country. We've discussed it on this program as well. But I am actually pleased, Jackson, that your views are being aired, because what we're hearing is exactly what is spouted to the Russian people to justify what's going on there. So in a way, you're providing a service, but you are so deluded as to what's happening on the ground and the dangers of where this goes because of what you believe in and what you've convinced yourself is where the direction of travel. It's very dangerous indeed, and it shows the power of propaganda, the power of social media today. And we need to get back to the facts here. Russia invaded Ukraine. We're in this dilemma where not enough efforts have been made to push Russian forces out of Ukraine. Where do we go from here? Is there going to be a deal? This can only be done if America and Europe are on the same page. If they're not, it becomes very problematic indeed. And I just stress again, sorry to reiterate it, but the bigger picture here is what is going on globally with China's advance of an alternative vision as to where our world goes. These are dangerous times indeed, and Ukraine is the ground zero of where it's all happening.
You mentioned the US, that the US and Europe and all parties in the conflict need to be on the same page. Let me move us on to our final section of the debate before we run out of time. President Trump spoke to the coalition that was meeting in Paris in a joint phone call during Thursday's meeting and said Europe needs to be doing more to end its reliance on Russian oil, accusing some European countries of funding the war effort. Now, there's no denying that some European leaders have been nervous about America's level of commitment to Ukraine's future security. And those jitters are only amplified by a president who continuously talks up his friendship with Putin and fails to follow through on any threat against the Russian leader. Lesia, let me ask you, President Trump has set out numerous deadlines for Russia to show that it's serious about peace, and they've all come and gone with no repercussions. Has Trump's diplomatic offensive failed?
It's an ongoing, I wouldn't say offensive, it's a process, it's an ongoing process. And we have faith in our strategic partners, the US being one of our main strategic partners, along with the UK. So we as the Ukrainian people, headed by the legitimate Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelenskyy, we are, of course, sitting by and waiting. I can't say that it's easy. It's extremely hard. It's extremely demoralizing at times to see how dialogue after dialogue is leading to no results, but more shootings on Ukrainian people, more air raids, more missile attacks that are being dropped in Western cities, in the capital, more civilian lives that are being taken. For us, this is extremely painful, and we would like to see the peace process move on much faster. But the only way to get the peace process to yield results is to make sure that the aggressor is immobilized, demilitarized, and unable to wage further aggression. And to do that, the US, along with Europe, need not only to enforce the sanctions, reinforce the sanctions, but also enforce the existing sanctions that are in place right now against Russia. And number two is, of course, make sure that there are no loopholes to circumvent the sanctions. This is not only about oil and gas sanctions. This is also about the selling of elements, components that are being found in the missiles that Russia launches onto Ukraine. Unfortunately, according to our intelligence services and our MFA, we find still a large number of components which are procured in the UK, in Germany, in Italy, that are then used in Russian missiles that are firing on Ukrainian civilians. But this is something that we are dealing with directly at bilateral levels and multilateral levels with our Western partners.
Okay. Jackson, what do you think of President Trump's diplomatic efforts here? He made out that this was going to be easy. Has he failed in his ability to be able to make a deal here?
Yes, I think on day one, President Trump should have come in and either said, Zelenskyy, you have to give up whatever President Putin wants, or else I'm going to wipe my hands clean. We're going to cut off Starlink, cut off all of the intelligence sharing, stop the weapons flow, which is kind of a difficult thing to do logistically in the short term, that is. And he should have broken bread with President Putin within the first week. He should have done that. I mean, Russia has always been a great friend of the United States. They helped our liberation effort in 1776 against the British. They helped us in the Civil War. They helped us in the War of 1812. So, yeah, I think Trump has failed thus far. Hopefully he can have some sort of a shift in the right direction. I think the meeting in Alaska was a good step. But it needs to be something tangible and serious, and so far we haven't seen that.
Tobias, the president is very transactional in his approach to foreign policy. Can this coalition of the willing rely on him to not change his mind if a better deal comes up?
Just to comment on Jackson, I mean, the love affair that you're describing between America and Russia, I think you glossed over the fact that Russia, the Soviet Union, almost took the world to a nuclear war in the 1960s. But we'll move on from that. The concern that many have about Trumpism, if you like, the retreat, the America first, the isolationism, is, in my view, this approach of Donald Trump to say, look, the global order isn't really working very well. I'm happy to allow a jungle out there to be chaotic. Each of the big beasts in that jungle are going to have their sphere of influence. America will have Panama, Greenland, Canada, and so forth. That'll be America's. Europe, Eastern Europe, that will be Russia's, and that includes Ukraine. China can have that. And as long as these three big beasts, alpha males, have their own territorial rights and respect each other, Donald Trump believes that the world can continue. That's a very dangerous approach as to where our world could drift to. It's a recipe for conflict. And I think what Donald Trump is realizing is that he can't court Putin in the way that he hoped to strike deals. It is curious. You mentioned oil there. I think there's some truth in that. But it's very difficult for European countries just to turn the taps off and keep their economies going. What we need to see is a plan to then unpick their reliance on Russia. That is something that Trump should be asking, because what's curious is that meeting in Alaska, I understand, was part discussions about Ukraine and part discussions about minerals deals. So America doing deals with Russia as well, which underlines that sort of Trumpism approach as to where our global order has gone. Happy to strike deals, transactional deals with both friend and foe, but with no commitment, as all previous US presidents have, to where our global order should be going.
What do you think, Lesia, about Trump's reliability as a deal maker, as a negotiator here? If he does make a deal, you said that there was no trust with the Russians. Is there trust with the Americans?
There is trust with the Americans, also with the rest of the Western allies. As you have seen over the last talks, it's not just the conversation happening between bilateral conversation between U.S. president and the Ukrainian president. It's also all of the leaders from Europe who are joining the table and who are there in the discussions, in the dialogue, because it's not just about the fate of Ukraine, it's also about the security of Europe, in particular the Eastern and Central European states who are bordering Ukraine and Russia. They will be most affected by the results of the peace deal, whatever that peace deal is. So it's good that there is an expansion there with their interlocutors and those who are participating in the deal making. That's already a good chance. So it's not just about the trust of one partner. It's actually a build-up collective trust for a collective peace and security that is being brokered here.
Jackson, does President Trump have the trust of the international community, because he seems to make deals, break deals, put tariffs on the table, take them off the table, put consequences for not looking serious about peace and then taking them off the table? Do you think that President Trump really has sort of lost his way a bit on this deal?
Yes, he has lost his way, but I think he really shouldn't care about the international community. I mean, when we say the international community, we're really talking about the Western world, who has, gone along with the United States previous administrations that were completely controlled by the deep state, with every single major globalist illegal war that the United States or Britain helped lead. So who cares about the international community? I think that we should chart new waters. I think that the United States should look eastward. I think that we should look at Russia. I think we should look at China. Trump just said he wants to meet with Kim Jong-un. Terrific. This is the direction we should be looking. We shouldn't be looking at Europe. Europe is dead. It is filled with all this LGBTQ nonsense. Their economy is dying. Let Europe die on its own. We don't need to be a part of that.
Tobias, is Europe really dying?
No, and what a load of waffle. America needs Europe to be strong because the American and European economy is so interlinked. as is our security interests as well, which go way beyond the Atlantic partnership. And this is where Donald Trump, I hope, will wake up and recognize it. He sort of picked this up when he was over for the NATO summit. Every single day, Britain is attacked by Russia in the gray zone. This is where we're seeing the advance of warfare. We have the shadow fleet of Russian ships that are dragging their anchors to try and clip undersea cables. We've had assassinations on European soil, including the UK as well. We've had disinformation campaigns, which I think I felt I've had a deluge of just now, but also through social media, interfering with elections. This is what Russia does extremely well. It controls its own society in that way, and it's spilling way beyond there to try and influence open societies across Europe. And if Europe is distracted, there may come a point, much as we're seeing, suggestions that America should court China. I mean, that again is for the birds. But ultimately, there could be a clash, a major clash that America is involved in, and it will become looking to Europe to say, will you be with us again? Will you actually stand with us? And we will be too distracted by what's going on with this bun fight with Russia. And that is what America needs to wake up to.
OK. Tobias, I mean, Richard Nixon famously met with Chairman Mao as part of a US strategy to sort of try and split the communist bloc. Is there not maybe a method to President Trump's, for want of a better phrase, apparent madness, method in his madness, trying to improve relations with Russia because that could achieve a better outcome in the end?
I think you asked probably the most important question that we've had so far. Well, what is the off-ramp that takes where China is on a clear mission. I've stressed that a couple of times. It's courting countries around the world through its Shanghai Cooperation Organization, through the One Belt, One Road, an alternative vision. And countries are liking it. Partly, this is the only point I think I agree with Jackson, is that the West have actually lost its moral authority. Invasions in Afghanistan and Iraq, Guantanamo Bay, for example. There are many examples where we've lost sight of our values and our standards. And understandably, there's been countries that say, I don't really like where the West is going. I'm going to try something else. So where is that ultimate summit in the future that might bring the big heads around the table, a Vienna Congress, a Treaty of Versailles, all merged into one, Bretton Woods, to say, how are we going to map out a vision that's going to be that pragmatic off-ramp for the 21st century? If we don't, then I'm afraid it's going to lead to greater conflict, a world at war, World War III, if you like, different to the last, but a world at conflict because nobody can put the alarm bells out that are glowing on the global order dashboard.
All right, let's get a last word from our other panellists before we need to wrap up. Jackson, what is the off-ramp here? Can we avoid a global conflict?
Of course, we can avoid a global conflict. I mean, none of this would have ever happened if the election wasn't stolen from Donald Trump in the first place. And he was president when this was all initially going down. I think probably the initial accords and agreements that Russia signed on to would have been respected by the Ukrainian counterparts, and none of this would have happened. But unfortunately, that didn't happen. And now we're in this position. So I think Trump can avoid global conflict. One last thing I want to say, I thought it was hilarious when the other panelists said that the United States needs Europe to be strong. That was the most insane thing I've ever heard in my life. Half of your economies in Europe are on life support, and they are completely reliant on Brussels and Germany and France. France is still okay. Germany's completely collapsed. Don't even get me started on inflation in the UK. You guys are a joke.
OK, we'll talk tariffs and economies on another debate. Lesia, round us out. What is the off-ramp here? Can a global conflict be avoided, or are we getting precariously close?
Look, we already are in the global conflict. Russia is using Iranian drones, North Korean troops, North Korean missiles. There's even reports of some Chinese soldiers fighting on the Russian side against Ukraine. So let's be clear about that. This is already global. This has already gone global. It's about whether we manage to constrain this conflict, this war, within the territory where it is right now, and whether we manage to put an end to it so that it doesn't spread to the territories of other countries and of other regions. And the only way to do it is to make sure that the aggression stops, that the order pre-aggression is restored, and that the aggressor bears responsibility for the crime of aggression. That's the only way to make sure that the red light is turned on aggression, not just in Europe, but on potential aggression in other regions of the world, and that dictators all across the world get the message loud and clear. And it's about a collective responsibility, not about just one country bearing full responsibility of being a victim of the crime of aggression. It's about a collective responsibility and a collective awareness about what actions lead to what consequences.
Well, let's hope there is an off-ramp before too many more lives are lost. We appreciate the time you've given us here on Counterpoints. To everyone, to our panellists, thank you so much for joining us here. Lesia, Vasyl-Enok, Ukrainian MP for the Holos party, Tobias Ellwood, former British Conservative MP, and Jackson Hinkle, political commentator and host of the Legitimate Targets podcast. Thanks for joining us. And thank you for tuning in to this episode of Counterpoints. To keep up to date with our latest debates and interviews, be sure to subscribe to Al Arabiya English on YouTube. And don't forget to follow us on X and TikTok. We'll see you next time.